Freedom is the ability to achieve your life dreams any way you please, so long as you do not initiate fraud or aggression against any peaceful people. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Today we have Spike Cohen, the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. Spike, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Cohen.
Oh, Keith, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you to everyone who's watching with Don't Tread on Anyone.
Oh, yes, I appreciate you saying that. So, Spike, what is libertarianism?
Wow, so my elevator pitch that I give on it, when someone says, what do libertarians believe? I say it's pretty simple. We believe that you own yourself, you own your life, you own your body, you own your labor, and you own the product of your labor, which is your property. And you exclusively enjoy the right to use those things and enjoy them as you see fit. You can give them away, you can sell them, you can share them, you can lend them, you can keep them for yourself, you can do what you want because they're yours. You inherently own them. And if anyone tries to take that from you, or if you try to take any of those things from anyone else without their consent, then you're committing an aggression. And libertarians believe that not only is aggression bad from a moral standpoint, that you shouldn't you shouldn't harm people, you shouldn't hurt people, you shouldn't try to take from them, you shouldn't try to defraud them and so forth, but it also doesn't work. If I can take from you, Keith, and everyone else that's watching and listening, whenever I see fit, I'm not going to be a very, very good steward of what I have, and I'm not going to make very good decisions with what I have. And you aren't going to be as good of a steward or make as good of a decision with what you have because you know I can come and take it from you at any time. And what are the bad policies of the Republicans and the Democrats? They're bad big government statist policies, but a system whereby they've presumed the authority to take from us whenever they see fit. That's why it leads to harmful, inequitable, and abusive outcomes. We as libertarians believe that far better outcomes come from allowing people to voluntarily interact with one another in what we call the spontaneous nature of human action in a market set free, which is really just a people set free.
Now, out of all the groups in society, out of corporations, charities, and everyone else, libertarians spend a lot of time focusing on government. What is it about government that makes it a unique institution worthy of all this criticism, as opposed to Amazon or Walmart or the Catholic Church?
Lack of consent. So any of these other organizations, and unfortunately now we're in a situation where, the Amazons and the Walmarts have found that they can sort of cozy up to government and enforce themselves on us as well. But absent the coercive nature of government, the only way that anyone is able to get from you, which is what ultimately we're all interacting with each other for scarce resources. We're all trying to work with each other either through cooperation, competition, or coercion to try to get the things that we need or that we want. If we do it in cooperation or in competition, that's us interacting freely and with a level of consent behind it, which allows people to choose who they want to get things provided by, who they want to associate with, who they want to work with, who they want to not work with. And because there's that choice there, it puts us all in a situation where if we want to be chosen, we have to provide. We have to show that we have a level of value. Once you take out that consent, and once you move away from cooperation or competition and instead to coercion, where I am forcing you to do business with me, I am creating a situation in which you have no other choice but to do business with me or to do what I say or to give me what you have that I want. Now, not only is that wrong again from a moral standpoint, I'm now taking from you against your will, but now it's leading to bad outcomes because I don't have to give you a good service. I don't have to demonstrate value. All I have to demonstrate is that if you don't do what I say or give me what I want, I will use whatever level of force is necessary to make you do it. And that's the opposite of value. I am now stealing. I am now coercing. I am now threatening. I am now using harm. Government is an instrument of harm. And we as libertarians believe that if government is to exist, its only purpose should be, if you even think it should have a purpose, its only purpose should be using that level of force and coercion to protect and affirm and preserve our lives and rights and property. As soon as it starts telling us what to do outside of that, now it's going into a nature of forcing us into bad situations. And all of the problems we're facing with healthcare, with education, with COVID-19, with the police brutality, with the wars, all of that boils down to government forcing us into things and forcing things onto us and forcing us to pay for it. And that is the problem. That is why we focus on government.
Terrific. Let's take that libertarian principle and start applying it to things in America. For example, the big one. Let's say we have a libertarian approach to the world what is the libertarian response to there's a virus in China, now it's coming to America, and we've gone from 1 or 2 cases to 10,000 to 50,000. What is the libertarian response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
The libertarian response would have been to not stop healthcare workers and medical professionals from testing and treating it when it first got here. I don't know who knows this, who's watching, but when the virus first got here, for the first 6 to 8 weeks, it was illegal for anyone to test for it. A lot of people don't know that. They talk about, oh, did the government do enough? The government stopped medical workers from treating people and saving lives. So when the first patients in the beginning of January first started coming into doctors' offices, and one of those doctors was Dr. Helen Chu at the University of Washington in Seattle, they went into her office and into other offices around the country, and they said, Doc, I don't feel too good. I just got back from Wuhan, China. I'm watching this thing on TV that's talking about this coronavirus, and I'm thinking I might have it. Thankfully, Dr. Helen Chu and a few other doctors, unfortunately a small handful of doctors, they didn't follow the law. Most doctors, when they heard that, they said, oh, wish there was something I could do for you, but it's illegal for me to test. Sorry, guess we'll just treat it like if it were a cold or a flu. Dr. Helen Chu and others put their Hippocratic oath above that stupid CDC regulation that said they couldn't test for it. And they started testing. They made the test kits, which apparently, if you know how to do such a thing, is relatively easy to make. They made the test kits, they tested the people, and some of them came back positive. And they went to the CDC and said, hey, listen, we already have it. This the worst pandemic of our time is already on our shores. We need to do something. The CDC's initial response to that was to say, destroy all those test results, tell no one, send those people home, do not tell them they have it, do not treat them. That's why it's as widespread here as it was. Thankfully, a handful of doctors put their Hippocratic oath above that law, or we wouldn't have even known. And thankfully, when they were told that, they went even further and they released the results to the public so that the public knew it was already here. And that forced the CDC's hand to allow testing to begin. Because if it were up to the CDC, they might now be getting around to telling us that it's here. And so now, as a result of that, we have a pandemic that is so far out of control. The idea of using contact tracing or trying to track down who has it, it's everywhere now. So there's nothing you can do about it other than to tell people, to try to slow the spread. So what did the state governments do? They tell us all to stay inside for as long as it takes and not to go outside and not to go visit our families, not to go to church, not to go to the park, not to go to the beach, not to go to any small businesses like furniture stores or gyms or getting their hair cut. Go to Walmart, they say. Everyone go to Walmart. Hundreds of people in the same building because that's safe. Everyone go to Target, that's safe. Everyone go to Costco, that's safe. Everyone stay home and buy things on Amazon and watch Netflix. Give your money to large corporations. And the large corporations that they couldn't tell you to give money to, like the airlines and the hotels and the big banks and the other big businesses, they printed out trillions of Federal Reserve notes and handed them bailouts. And they gave the rest of us $1,200 and said, stay inside forever until we tell you you can come back outside. And if you do come outside and you don't listen to us, we'll put you in a cage where you're almost certain to get COVID-19. And the threat there is very explicit. Listen to what we say, do what we tell you to, or we will infect you. That has been the government's response. Ours would be the exact opposite. We would not have gotten in the way of medical professionals who are trying to save people's lives. That would have allowed this. Would it still be here? Yes, it would still be here. It's a highly virulent pathogen, but it could have been contained. It could have been in a situation where they could use contact tracing and trying to actually, reduce the number of people that have it and maybe stop it in its tracks. But they weren't allowed to for nearly 2 months. It went almost completely undetected. So that's a perfect example of how government creates a problem, allows it to become worse, and then uses that problem as an excuse to run roughshod over us.
Correct. And we also see it with the FDA stopping KN95 masks from being traded and exchanged because they're regulated as medical devices. We see it not only in this, we've been seeing it for decades, so much so that it doesn't even get into our conscience. We just accepted it, that if you have a kidney disease, you're probably going to die if it gets bad. Whereas in Iran, where you could compensate people for kidneys, it's illegal in America, but they have a surplus of kidney availability in countries where you can compensate people. So again, coercive mechanism stopping people from having flourishing lives where they otherwise would. I don't see how the existence of a large coercive apparatus stops people from getting sick. I would think that certainly halters or halts innovation more than it otherwise would.
Well, we talk about we talk about the dynamic nature of the spontaneous nature of human action in a market set free. But let's contrast that with the brittle, ham-handed, tone-deaf, short-sighted, crony-friendly, abusive nature of centrally planned solutions, where a small handful of people who often have absolutely no idea what they're talking about and are only in the position that they're in because they pandered the best and were the most craven to the public. They are the ones making these decisions. And the reality is they're not making the decisions. Incredibly powerful cronies hand them legislation and say, here's the solution. Here's the regulation we want you to have the alphabet soup agencies pass. Here's the new law and the new agency we want you to create. It's totally going to make everything better. Oh, by the way, the endless millions of dollars are going to keep rolling into your campaign coffers, and they'll stop the very second that you don't sign what we tell you to sign. They spend millions of dollars to get stuff passed and to get stuff enforced, and they make trillions of dollars by suppressing the entire rest of the market and not allowing people to disrupt and forcing them into situations where they have to use them for their services instead of being able to compete with them and disrupt and create new innovations in the market. It is a hampering of the market. It is a giant choke chain and a giant boot on the neck of the people as we try to work to solve the problems that are often imposed upon us by the bad big government solutions of the Republicans and the Democrats.
Of course, yeah. And this is not anything new. We have Citibank in the WikiLeaks emails choosing Barack Obama's staff for him. We have Halliburton pushing us into the Iraq war with Dick Cheney as president. We have the head of General Electric, Spoke is his last name, who wrote the New Deal. This is how the state operates. It's you can either get your achieve your ends voluntarily in the marketplace or violently through the rent-seeking process. We have political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. So say that I feel that these really big corporations have a lot of power, whereas your average person does not have much. Therefore, we need the state to have some regulation, even though bad regulation can exist, which the progressive may admit every now and then. We still need a mechanism there, the state, to stop this total imbalance of power from getting too out of control. What is the libertarian Joe Jorgensen, Spike Cohen response to that ideology?
Well, the libertarian response, and I think Dr. Jorgensen would agree with this. I know that she would. It is like saying, I know that this is a fox that is saying he's going to keep the other foxes out of the hen house, but maybe if we give him just a little bit of power to decide what foxes can and can't come into our hen house, maybe that will be okay. We see what happens. And the beauty of their system, I say beauty sarcastically, is it can start small. It just keeps getting bigger. It's like a chia pet of horrors. And so, so for example, the EPA, we were told we needed an EPA because there was smog and pollution and greenhouse gas. Now we're told, the greenhouse gas emission and the hole in the ozone layer and our lands and our water are being polluted. What did the EPA do? The EPA created a series of regulations which are increasingly more difficult to comply with, specifically in order to stop small and medium businesses from being able to compete. It forces them into a situation where they either have to fold and fall under a larger corporation or just go out of business and allow that larger corporation to come in and take over everything. And you're thinking, well, at least it stopped them from polluting. Here's the problem. When those big businesses pollute, when they do these massive spills and these massive leaks and these massive, pollution, polluting into the sky and everything else, when they do these things, both accidentally and through just gross negligence and careless error, they get tiny little, I don't even want to call it a slap on the wrist because you can feel a slap on the wrist. They get a small eyelash touching the edge of their wrist hair when they do this stuff. They get, they do tens of trillions of dollars in environmental damage and they'll get like a few $1 million fine. And you know what else they get? Protection against lawsuits. And you know what else they get? They have the taxpayer pay for the cleanup. So they go and they spill and they do pollution that lowers their cost of doing business. And in response, they get a small fine that is less than the cost of if they had done it the right way. They get protected from lawsuits, and then their cost of cleanup is externalized to others, to the rest of us who got polluted. They force the victims to pay for it. We see that with the asbestos trust fund. The asbestos companies got shielded from the lawsuits of what they did, and we, the victims of the asbestos, have to pay for it ourselves while they got some small ridiculous fine that was nothing. So there's a perfect example where some regulation has led to the protection of the very people who do the harm. And we see that across the board. We see that with police brutality. We see that with war. We see that with education. We see large cronies do damage to the market and to the people and to our environment and to our lifestyles and to our livelihoods. They are given small fines as a show of, oh, look, we're holding them accountable. They are shielded from the lawsuits that actually would hold them accountable if that and act as a deterrent for them to even do it in the first place if they were allowed to do that. And then the cost of the damage that they did is externalized to its very victims. That is what you get from government regulation. Oh, and in the process, the small and medium businesses that would have never done any of this stuff are put out of business because they can't afford what the compliance costs.
Exactly. So we have fewer options as consumers. As employees, we have fewer places to work, which gives employees less leverage. That means your wages are likely to be lower than they otherwise would as a causal result of regulation. Back to the fox and the hen house. Let's just apply this to any other organization. The Koch brothers have a right to forcibly stop me from making exchanges so long as they do it reasonably. Right away, you see the problem with that. Hey, guys, tell me, give me recommendations, give me your stamp of approval, but really you're going to force, as in cage, me and Spike, if we go to make a voluntary exchange in our interest, really? I mean, look, if I want to smoke cigarettes, it's my life, my body, my choice.
As long as they decide it's reasonable. I love what you're doing there, by the way. Your Honor, I know I've been accused of murder, but what I think what I did was perfectly reasonable. And the judge goes, oh, well, then case is dismissed. Go on home. Here's your bail money back. That's what qualified immunity is, folks. When a government official, that was a great lead-in, by the way. That's beautiful. I'm going to start bringing you in as my hype man. That when a government official, a police officer, a politician, a child protective service worker, a medical official, anyone with a government, at any level, does something wrong, does something that infringes upon your rights, does something that harms you in a demonstrable and measurable way, including killing you, you can't sue them. Your family, your survivors, almost assuredly cannot sue them if they determine that it was reasonable. And now since 2001, it's gotten even worse. People don't realize qualified immunity has been even worse for the last 19 years because now, even if the court's saying there's no way you could have possibly thought that was reasonable, unless that exact same abuse has already happened in that exact same jurisdiction, setting a precedent, then they still can't be held responsible. So a perfect example of this, 2 police officers in Tennessee were arresting someone. He already surrendered, and they had their canine officer maul him for no reason, just because they wanted to. And it caused all sorts of damage to him, permanent health damage to him. They couldn't be sued even though that exact same thing had happened in that exact jurisdiction, because in the first case, the suspect was lying down on their side, and in this case, the suspect was sitting upright. In another case, corrections officers were mercilessly pepper spraying an inmate who was locked in his cell who was doing nothing wrong. They had absolutely no reason to do it. They just felt like doing it. They were not held accountable because even though that's a similar thing had happened in a prison in that exact jurisdiction, in the first case, they used a taser, and this time they used pepper spray. Qualified immunity allows the government to do whatever they want to you, and it's nearly impossible for them to be held accountable. So if you feel bad that the EPA and the government is stopping, polluting companies from being held accountable, if it's any consolation, they've also made it where they also can't be held accountable. Oh, and they externalize the cost of any lawsuits to you as the victim anyway.
Sure. Now, we have people like Rand Paul having trying to put forth legislation that makes no-knock raids illegal for things like drugs. Not altogether, but things like drugs, the victimless crime.
It's a start.
We have Justin Amash trying to put an end to qualified
Yes.
immunity. So it's
Yep.
really only the libertarians that are actually bringing solid responses to the table. What are
Yep.
some additional things? Maybe, I know Dr. Jorgensen works in psychology. Is it maybe just an idea that the populace needs to understand to fix this police issue? What is your general response that we could add on to solve this police brutality issue in America?
So we're very happy about what Libertarian Congressman Justin Amash is doing in the House. He has introduced tripartisan legislation. First of all, I just like saying tripartisan. I love that that's entered the lexicon already. Tripartisan legislation to end qualified immunity. We are happy that Rand Paul is doing the ending no-knock raids for drug raids. Like you said, it's a start. It would be great to not have that for anything, but it's a start. Dr. Jorgensen's plan is to end police brutality at its root, which is the federal government not just allowing it, but funding it and equipping it. So we will end qualified immunity. Joe Jorgensen will end no-knock raids for everything. Joe Jorgensen will end civil asset forfeiture, which is a federally run program whereby governments can steal from people before they are tried or convicted of anything. And then if they are found not guilty or if their charges are dropped, they still have to sue for their own stuff back, even though it was just shown that it never should have been taken from them in the first place. That is a program that is in all 50 states that will end immediately. We will end the 1033 military surplus program, where the military industrial complex is increasingly co-opting the police to prison industrial complex and dumping all of their military surplus and the training to use that equipment on police officers. We focus a lot on the fact that these cops are getting tanks and grenade launchers and drones and everything else. What we aren't talking as much about is the fact that they're getting military training on how to use this stuff. There is no domestic policing application for a mine-resistant personnel carrier. There's no domestic civilian policing application, or at least not a reasonable one, for using armed drones and grenade launchers and breaching equipment. That is something that is specifically and inherently and explicitly used for military martial applications. And so the training that these officers are increasingly getting is on a mindset of treating where they patrol as a war zone, and the people that they interact with as potential enemy combatants, instead of what they are, our friends and neighbors and loved ones, who also are just trying to get home to their families. When you couple all of this together, militarization of mindset, militarization of equipment, authorization through the war on drugs to endlessly put people in cages for engaging in victimless commerce. The same thing with the war on sex work, which we would also end. No-knock raids, which allows them to basically violate the Fourth Amendment by not even giving us any kind of due process or right to unreasonable search and seizure in our own properties, by simply just coming in plain clothes, which is how Breonna Taylor got murdered, because they came into her house plain clothes, broke into her home at 3 a.m, and so her boyfriend rightfully thought they were being invaded by private sector criminals. He fired at them and they opened fire on both of them, killing Breonna Taylor in her own bed, safe at home, doing nothing wrong to anyone. All of these things have to end because they incentivize bad policing and they punish good policing. And a perfect example with qualified immunity is it puts police departments in a cost-benefit analysis where when they have a Derek Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd, part of the reason the Minneapolis Police Department didn't get rid of him before that, even though he had 17 other complaints against him, including a wrongful death complaint, someone else he killed, they had to keep him because they looked and they said, well, this officer's terrible, he's abusive, but he's not costing us any money because of qualified immunity. But if we try to fire him, we're going to have to go after the police unions and we're going to have to spend lots of money just to get rid of him. Let's just keep him on the force, and if he does something too bad, we'll just have to prosecute him and then we can get rid of him without too much trouble. That is the cost-benefit analysis that every single police department in this country is having to face. It is punishing good policing and incentivizing bad policing, and its root and its core is in bad federal policy that Democrats and Republicans have been the architects of. Joe Jorgensen will end all of it on day one.
Now, let's say that I see the separating the protesters from the rioting and the looters that was taking place in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I am, Minneapolis,
Yeah.
large number of other cities, New York, I might look at this and say, well, I am sort of against a militarized police. This may be the alternative. If I'm someone who really values law and order, seeing the state as the provider of law and order, why should I consider the libertarian presidential ticket?
Well, because we saw how this happened. Because you are correct. There are the peaceful protesters, and then there are protesters who, after they are brutalized, become understandably upset and fight back. And then there are looters and rioters who really just, it was an opportunity for them to steal and pillage. But let's look at what happened here. First of all, none of this would be happening without the police brutality and systemic racism that led us here in the first place. So the conditions were already set by government from the beginning. Now let's fast forward to the actual days and time and the actual times that the protests are unfolding. You have peaceful, unarmed, angry, but peaceful and unarmed protesters who are being cordoned into small areas of a given city with almost the entirety of the police personnel there in their full-on military kit. And the very second that the curfew ends, or after they're given 30 seconds to disperse, they just start wailing on them. They're pepper balling them. And pepper balls are like these large, hard, they're almost like paintballs, but they're harder and they're filled with a substance that's similar to pepper spray. And people have died by being hit by pepper balls, and they're just shooting into it. They've shot at just completely indiscriminately. They've hit food delivery drivers. They've hit reporters. They've hit everyone. They're just basically spraying the crowd with pepper balls. They're using tear gas, which is banned by the Geneva Convention. So here you have people that have showed up to protest the government abusing them, and the government responds by abusing them, all of them at once. So they now have turned a protest into a riot. And in fact, it is the police that are starting the riot. At the same time, because all of the policing has been concentrated in this area, the entire rest of the city is left unpoliced and unpatrolled. And these cities typically also have fairly strict I don't know about your area, but a lot of them also have fairly strict gun control laws, which means the only people who can effectively stop private sector criminals are the police, or at least that can legally stop them. So you have opportunists come in and go, oh, wow, the entire rest of the city is left unpoliced. If this business owner calls 911, no one's ever going to come. I can do whatever I want. So you have police policy that was based on punishing people for sharing their grievances, which is protected in the First Amendment. You have people that, because they focused on punishing people for sharing their dissent and their anger about what's going on, also leaving the entire city unpoliced. Now, we can say that that's negligence, or we can say that the police departments recognize that when that happens, people call for order. They call for more policing. They call for more protection. They call for more foxes to protect them in their hen house. And that's what we have right now. So you can decide for yourself whether it is intentional malfeasance or whether it is gross negligence or some combination of those two. But it is the militarized police state and its actions both before and during these protests that led to exactly what we face. Little side note there. You'll remember about a month prior, there were some protests against the lockdowns, and most of those people came armed.
Yes, I do, in Michigan, with Governor Whitmer.
Yeah, you remember any of those ending with the protesters being tear gassed and pepper sprayed? Or back in, February, when 20,000 armed people descended on Richmond to protest the gun laws? Do you remember the police tear gassing and pepper brawling them?
No, it certainly seems like when there is a balance of power, the other people realize they have to be on their heels.
It's almost as though you shouldn't bring tear gas to a gunfight.
Yeah.
Now, I have noticed in an increasing number of these protests, you've had some of the Boogaloo Boys, you've had some Black Panthers, you've had people go up to the front of the line armed, and suddenly those protests are allowed to continue.
Correct. Yeah. Thaddeus Russell makes this point in a discussion with Hotep Jesus that it's not really a white and black thing. Every time the potential victims are armed, it creates a massive disincentive for the police to initiate aggression into what would otherwise be a peaceful demonstration. I think you're definitely right that a lot of this is the result of blowback from having to deal with police, a service they're very unhappy with. If it
Right.
were private, you would just stop funding it, and they wouldn't be doing it in the first place, killing Eric Garner, because they'd say, well, we're going to lose funding. They just know they get funding coercively.
And they wouldn't have been ordered to do it because keep in mind, the police didn't just kill Eric Garner because they felt like it. They did it because they were part of a task force that was stopping people from selling cigarettes without collecting taxes for it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that is the most mafia move ever. We didn't get our cut.
Yeah, no, it is. It's the protection racket taken to its full and logical conclusion. People being choked out in the middle of the street for not collecting 25-cent taxes on the loosies they're selling out in the sidewalk. And so you have a perfect example where in the case of private or community policing, there'd be no appetite for that because the people wouldn't want it. They wouldn't want to be robbed to pay for that. They would, or I shouldn't say robbed. They wouldn't want to pay to have people do that to other people. They just want their property and their rights and their lives protected. That's it. And that's all they do. And if they did something else, either through negligence or malfeasance, they'd be replaced with someone else.
Sure. The only thing that, and maybe you and I do agree on this,
Okay.
I just misheard you. You had mentioned that, well, when the police sort of lean back and allow some chaos to go on, it creates a desire for people to want order. Well, yes, I want order as well as a libertarian. I do not believe that government is the source of order. To the contrary,
No, of course not.
Governments are the number one cause of chaos, number one cause of war, genocide, kidnapping people for victimless crimes, stopping people from making voluntary exchanges. Do you want to clarify that point?
Yeah, and I'm glad you. If I said that in a way that made you go to that conclusion, I'm glad you gave me a chance to clarify. What I'm saying is when they do that stuff and when they allow this chaos to ensue as a result of their negligence to do their actual job, it leads the general public to say, well, something has to be done about these thugs that are looting and rioting, and then the police, the police unions and the police and the pro police, bootstrap bootlicking politicians can step in and go, well, we need more cops on the streets and we need them to have more military equipment because we have a war in our streets and these thugs are trying to destroy everything and spread anarchy and all of this. And that so they capitalize off of people's fear of this happening. Most people just want stability. When I talk to people, when I campaign to people, and this is an important thing to keep in mind when we're spreading the libertarian message, and I know that's a very important thing to you. When I talk to people, I don't start with libertarian theory. When they ask me what I think about something, I tend to focus on the immediate things that are facing us and what we would do to end that problem from happening and to allow people to experience the benefit of government not causing that problem or making it worse in the first place. And in doing so, I can bring them down into the actual theory of libertarianism. Libertarians tend to be system first. We explain our system first, and then we try to break it down afterwards. That's not how most people process things. They process things. Here's what's happening in front of me. Here's what innately and intuitively makes sense to me that we should be doing about it, which unfortunately often is not the best idea. So first, perfect example, government drives up the cost of healthcare the way that they have with all of the red tape. The majority of people look at that and go, I can't afford healthcare. I'm scared. I could lose everything if I end up in an emergency room or if I end up with a chronic health problem. Something has to be done. And they're telling me that, in other countries, it's just free and no one has to pay for it. That sounds good to me. Let's do that. And if we show up and we go, well, but the problem is no one has a right to health care, and in a free market, it would be a lot cheaper. And so, we should switch to free market. And of course, they keep hearing free market the way Republicans say free market, which just means rebranding what we have now, which is a terrible system. And they immediately shut us out. They think we do not care about them. They think that we're just a bunch of, wealthy white men who want to, keep all of our money and the poor can starve, because we came at them the wrong way. If instead we empathize with them and we say, this system is terrible, this system is absolutely disgusting, I share your fear. And I can tell, I have MS. I don't want our system to become any more expensive. I don't want a system where people are being left behind the way that this system is. And we spend so much more money than anyone else is spending, and our outcomes are not all that much better. And then I can take them on the journey as to what got us here, how every single time that government involved itself, the costs skyrocketed more and the access went down. And then I can empathize with them because whether you're a populist, a progressive, a libertarian, an anarchist, whatever, we all hate the cronies. And so you can focus on the fact that crony companies are able to actually buy. You have like pirate companies that come in and they'll buy a pharmaceutical company, destroy the R&D department so they're not making any new drugs, and just use the patent protection on the drugs that they already have patents on, and jack up the price 100-fold and distribute it and make it so that you have to pay 100 times more what the price used to be. And they're actually stopping new drugs from being made so they can keep forcing you to use the old drugs by not allowing right to try legislation and by jacking up the time and the price of new drugs entering the market. They do this intentionally to cordon off your choices and force you to use their choices. Remember, cooperation or competition, they go straight to coercion instead. They bypassed actually providing value and force you into a situation because of patent laws that allow them to do that. And so if you can empathize with someone from where they are and demonstrate that you actually care about their concerns and also identify what it is they're concerned about, then we can present our solutions. And it works amazingly. It's how I brought so many people to this movement. It's how I will help Joe Jorgensen to win this election. It's by using empathetic and engaging and dynamic forms of reaching people where they are. This is sales and marketing 101. Meet people where they are, identify their concerns, empathize with them, demonstrate that you are trustworthy, and then show them the way out of it.
Yes, but people often see government as the source of not only order, but of security.
Right.
So they often don't really grasp the fact that government is very volatile. And in Trump's era alone, we're almost at war with Iran, World War III. Democrats, we might have to go to war with Russia and respond militarily. We might go to war with North Korea. We might have to invade Venezuela, John Bolton. So I actually see government as something very volatile. I'm wondering, what is the foreign policy approach of the libertarian ideology?
Oh, Joe Jorgensen is going to end the wars, bring the troops home, make America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. The people are armed because we are no longer enforcing ridiculous, infringing federal gun laws. So the people are armed. We have whatever military force is necessary to defend against direct aggression, not threats of aggression, but actual actions being undertaken to aggress upon us, which means we don't have to maintain, hundreds of military bases occupying the entire planet. All that ends. All those troops come home safely to their families where they belong, which also ends all these caskets coming home draped in flags. It also ends the countless amounts of PTSD, traumatic brain injury, other chronic injuries, traumatic, psychological issues that happen as a result of engaging in something that no one should have to engage in except for, to defend themselves, and engaging in it for no other reason than to benefit the military-industrial complex, ending all of that, dismantling that complex, and bringing them home and allowing the healing to begin both here and in the countries where immeasurable harm has been done. When the Vietnam War ended, we were told that they were going to come here and start the war over here. What did they do? Some of them came over here to work and become part of the American dream. Most of them stayed over there. We're now trading partners with them. Turns out that you can just trade with them because Vietnam never wanted a war with us. Afghanistan never wanted a war with us. The Taliban didn't want a war with us. And I'm not excusing the Taliban. They're a government too. But this idea that when we come in, when our military comes in, they make things better. They don't. They create the boogeymen that justify their continuing to be there. It's just another type of boondoggle. It's just a boondoggle that results in immeasurable deaths and harm and trauma. Joe Jorgensen will end that and allow the healing to begin.
But will that make American citizens subject to terrorism from other countries who do not like the U.S. for its freedoms? Allegedly, that is the general neoconservative response that I really want to communicate to them, the libertarian idea.
Americans will be more safe because terrorists won't have a reason to hate us anymore. So I was a neocon. When 9/11 happened, I fully bought the government media lie that the terrorists hated us for our freedoms and wanted to, spread radical Islam around the world, and that they were just trying to, take over the world, and that we had to do everything we could to stop it at its core and fight them over there so we wouldn't have to fight them over here, and that we'd go and invade and spread peace and love through bombing, and that we would spread democracy through chaos, and that we would spread harmony through destruction. And I fully bought it. And then two things happened. One, I kept hearing this really annoying guy named Ron Paul who would say, no, 9/11 was blowback for the actions in the U.S. government in Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And no, the Iranians don't hate us because we're Christian or Jewish or whatever. Iran doesn't like us because we overthrew their democratically elected government and reinstalled a brutal dictator in order to preserve crony interests in Iran and the military industrial complex's interests in Iran. And then I saw that all the stuff that he said was going to happen with Iraq and Afghanistan, which I said was garbage, and he was, full of crap and didn't know what he was talking about, it all just kept happening. And then by about 2006, I thought, oh gosh, this guy was right, and everything I've been saying was wrong. Terrorism is the result of what happens when a foreign entity goes in, destabilizes, invades, and completely destroys the civil infrastructure of an entire society. And those people eventually say, you know what? Enough already. I'll even join this religious extremist group to fight back. And it's not a coincidence that we keep discovering every few years that whatever terrorist boogeyman we're fighting right now was either partially or wholly created or trained or armed or funded by some arm of the U.S. military or intelligence community. We know that Al-Qaeda was created as a result of the creation of the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s. We know that that ISIS came out of the Sunni street militias in Iraq that were tapped by the U.S. military and intelligence services to fight against the Iranian militias and the Saddam Fedayeen. We know that whatever's coming now that we don't even know the name of will be there to fight against whatever the other thing was that was created by us.
Well, Saddam Hussein, too, was funded. Donald Rumsfeld went over
Yep.
there to sell him weapons to fight against the Iranians.
Mm-hmm. Yep. In fact, the weapons of mass destruction that they kept talking about were the ones that they sold to him or gave to him during that time. They literally said, we have to invade this country to get back the weapons that we sold them. And then it turned out they had destroyed them or used them. Some of them they had just used, some of them they had destroyed, and some of them had gone, bad over time because they had a shelf life. So then they made up the lie that they had a nuclear weapons program. They did not. They didn't. They had no such thing. This is what you get when government says, I'm here to help. Whether it's war, education, healthcare, immigration, infrastructure, policing, any aspect that they get involved in, this is what they do. If a government is to exist, its only purpose should be very clear. Recognize your rights and your self-ownership and your bodily autonomy, and then defend it immediately or punish people who aggress upon it. That is it. And it doesn't. In fact, it often won't do that. The one thing that it's actually supposed to do, it is often derelict in. The looting and riots that they just allowed to happen is a perfect example of them being derelict in the very thing that they supposedly are supposed to be doing, instead focusing on punishing people for sharing their anger and their dissent over how they're being treated.
Of course, and they often have I can't think of the word, a reverse incentive, because when 9/11 happens under Bush's approval rating goes to 91%.
Yep.
Because people look for the solution. They don't say, hey, people on the other side of the social contract promising to keep us safe, you owe us money or you all get fired. You have to hold up your end. FDR getting elected again after Pearl Harbor, after not keeping people safe. So, unfortunately, you get the same thing. The best source on 9/11 being the result of blowback, I would say, is bin Laden's letter to the Americans, where he actually cites Iraqi sanctions, which is known as water treatment vulnerabilities, that led to so many deaths that the experts, so to speak, don't even agree on to the tens of thousands. How many children died because chlorine was blocked from being brought into the country. So again, I mean, again, this is something that government causes the problem. Then we see the problem and say, government, please help us more. It's totally counterproductive.
And what they do is, the reason they create these problems, like what we saw with the pandemic, like what we've seen with the wars and terrorism, like what we've seen with education, with everything, with healthcare, create a problem, sow fear and discord and anxiety, pit everyone against each other so that they aren't able to step back and see, wait a second, I'm being manipulated by these two sides who are telling me that they're fighting against each other, that this side's good and that side's evil, or this side's good and that side's evil, when the reality is it's not any of that. They're on the same side. Because when it comes down to every big thing, they hold hands and pass it together because they recognize that they have to stand strong together and they have to keep the people divided or else they will not be in power anymore. It is a very tenuous hold that they have on civil society, and it is why they are constantly creating discord through their bad centrally planned ideas, which is why I tend to lean towards it being malfeasance and not negligence, because it also just so happens to feed directly into their goals of keeping everyone scared and divided and anxious and hopeful that someone will just step in and fix it for them, because that's what they've been told their whole lives. Look at poverty. Government has put up a series of barriers, regulatory burdens, zoning laws, NIMBY laws, taxes, licensing, occupational licensing laws, the war on drugs, over policing in poor and urban communities, systemic racism against marginalized communities. All of these things have been put in place to make people go down and stay down. And now they only have a handful of options. They can either run up tens of thousands of dollars of debt to do the compliance cost to try to do something like braid hair or be to mow lawns or be a handyman or own a catering service, making nowhere near that much money just to try to get ahead in life. So they can't do that. Or they have to go and be a wage slave for someone else. Or they have to just live in abject poverty and just live on the crumbs of what has been stolen from them, their property, their lives, their ability, and their opportunities robbed from them and given back to them in little crumbs, like we give little bits of food to goldfish, and kept just alive enough to stay scared and to stay anxious and to live in a substandard lifestyle. And then you know what happens? Then one side comes in and goes, "You're lazy. You're a bum. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Look at yourself. You have no personal responsibility. You make me sick." Now, of course, no one focuses on the fact that they tell them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but the bootstrap license is $100,000. No one mentions that part. And then the other side comes in and goes, "What are they talking about? You're not a bum. Everything's been taken from you. We're going to give it back to you. We're going to tax those evil billionaires, and we're going to give you everything that you need because it's your right." And so they've created the rope-a-dope. The poor, the disenfranchised go back to this side of the monster that has robbed them of everything because they think that they're benefiting from being in that arrangement. And this side stays with this side of the monster who is demonizing the poor people who have been held down, because they've created class warfare. We talk about class warfare like it's rich and poor. The real class warfare is from the absolute poorest to the people just above them, and the people there to the people just above them. People who live in over leveraged homes that are worth $150,000, $200,000. They're up to their neck in debt. They're completely beholden to a handful of well-heeled cronies who own something like 90% of the wealth in this country. Who do they hate? They hate some poor guy who's, living on food stamps and welfare a few miles down the road. And they go, "That bum's the reason why my taxes are so high. Look at him in here using that EBT food card to get food." And what he's not focusing on is the guy who's getting universal basic income for billionaires and living a lavish life that we can't even fathom, owning literally entire sections of this country, buying and selling people as they see fit, providing absolutely no value to the market, providing less value to the market than that poor schmuck who's having to live on EBT and substandard subsidized housing because they were robbed of their opportunities. That's the real class warfare. All of that comes from the divisive nature of what the state intends for the people that live under its presumed jurisdiction. Joe Jorgensen will end all of that by removing those burdens and barriers so that people can thrive together, so that people can help each other, so that people can work their way out of it, and so that these well-heeled cronies, if they want to remain rich, they have to actually provide us value, because the gravy train in DC has been cut off permanently.
Correct, yeah. And we definitely see people like Elvis Summers in Los Angeles, who was building $1,000 houses for the homeless.
Yep.
And the state comes in and seizes everything because of zoning laws.
Yep,
Same thing happened
exactly.
in Washington, D.C. I can't remember the source. I do cite the source in What is the Number One Cause of Homelessness, a video that I will link below. So, Spike, we got 1 minute left. You have 1 minute. A lot of people, unfortunately, mainstream media intentionally ignores libertarian candidates. They've never heard of you. What do you got to say to them?
I got to say that if we get 15%, we get on that debate stage, Jo Jorgensen wins this election. If you look at her up against Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's all over. All of their cloak and dagger, emperor's new clothes, saying that they're the only real viable options, and these third parties are a joke, and it's a waste of a vote to throw it away. If we get that 15% in the polls, we get her on that debate stage, an absolutely brilliant, self-made woman who's ready to lead from day one, a senior lecturer who's able to break down complex ideas in a way that connects with everyday Americans and break down point by point and case by case how the Democrats and the Republicans have created this problem and how common sense libertarian solutions are the way out of it. It's a no-brainer. She's going to walk away with this thing. We get Jo Jorgensen on that stage, it's all over. Gary Johnson and Bill Weld got 13% and 11% in two polls back in 2016. And in the time between then and now, social media has become all that much more prevalent, and the dying TV news media gatekeepers have become all that much less prevalent. We need to agitate and tell our friends and our loved ones in an empathetic and engaging and dynamic way why this is the way forward, why the Jorgensen-Cohen campaign is the way forward. If we can get 15% in those polls, we get on that debate stage, we win this election, the change starts happening. The wars end, the war on drugs end, the people in the prisons who are being used for free labor to the benefit of for-profit prison labor contractors, the chattel slavery program we have now, that all ends. Police brutality ends. Systemic racism ends. The war on children and families ends. The war on affordable healthcare and education ends. The government's aims to keep us down, all of that ends. The neck is taken off. The boot is taken off the neck of the American people, so that we can live freer and happier and safer and healthier lives. And with your help and your support, that is exactly what we will do. So I invite you to join us at joj2020.com. That's joj2020.com. You can fill out our volunteer form there, and you can also make a contribution. In fact, tomorrow's my birthday. I'm turning 38, and so I'm asking everyone watching, donate $38. 38 for 38. We don't really have a name for that campaign yet, but we'll call it 38 for 38 right now. So in honor of my birthday, I'm asking you to donate to the campaign to help us spread the message of liberty that you heard today to as many people as humanly possible so that we can win this election. $38 if you go to joj2020.com and press the donate button. And if you make a donation of $38, they'll know why you picked that number. And so I appreciate your support. And thank you all for listening. And Keith, thank you so much for your time and your patience. And I look forward to let's win this thing, guys.
Absolutely. Mr. Cohen, thank you for your time. I'd like to finish with a quote by Ludwig von Mises. If one rejects laissez-faire on account of man's fallibility and moral weakness, one must for the same reason also reject every kind of government action. Thank you for watching Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone.
Thank you, guys.